Hello, and thank you for joining us for the webinar, Future-Proof Your Regulatory Submissions for Global Compliance, presented by Reed Tech and Schlafender Hase. Today's webinar is pre-recorded, but questions will be monitored throughout the presentation. And once the presentation is complete, we will have David Wilson from Reed Tech and Peter Muller from Schlafender Hase jump on live at the end, and we will address as many questions as we can. Please utilize the chat box within the GoToWebinar functionality to ask any questions that you may have. Thank you. We hope you enjoyed today's presentation.
My name is Peter Muller. I'm the Director for North America for Schlafender Hase, and I'll be one of your presenters today.
And hello, I'm David Wilson, Senior Account Executive with Reed Tech Life Sciences. And I'll be joining Peter through our 30-minute whirlwind.
Excellent, excellent. So we have, so Schlafender Hase, what we do is we provide a tool to be able to compare content, so text and graphics, between two different documents, both in format and layout, and identify any deviations.
Great, and Reed Tech, much like Schlafender Hase is a industry leader in their space. We are an industry leader in the preparation, process management and submission of structured product labeling, XML, for both the pharmaceutical industry, EDRL compliance with the US FDA, soon to come Health Canada, as well as global unique device identification for the medical device industry.
Excellent, and we have a fairly busy agenda today. The topic that we're speaking about is honestly a massive topic. We could probably spend hours on any one of these points. The goal today is really to provide you a high-level overview and some kind of keys that we've seen in this space, and how you can get better at managing your information and basically future-proof yourself for changes that are coming. So three key topics we're going to talk about today. As a disclosure here, we don't provide any of the services or any of the solutions that we're going to be talking about. So you'll see in our first poll slide that's coming up. But we do work with both regulatory bodies and with customers that are performing submissions. So both of our organizations, Schlafender Hase and Reed, have learned some important lessons in this space. And we're just trying to share some of that knowledge today. So Kate, if you could please launch the first poll question that we have.
So a lot of what we see, so about 10% of our attendees are looking to implement artwork management solution, about 30% a RIM solution, about 40% a labeling solution, and then 63% falling under that regulatory artwork and labeling tools implementing.
Okay, excellent. So we'll jump straight into the current landscape. Let me organize my windows here. There we go. Okay, so currently we have, let's go back one slide. There we go. Sorry about that. So currently, the drivers we have in our industry are regulation, obviously. There's the industry standards. We've got regulatory information. So we can see here in the chart all of the factors that go into our entire process here. So we have all the information that's coming into the core labeling. Then we have further information that gets put into the local labeling, and then actually goes in and out to various different organizations or departments within the organization. And then we have the exchanges with the health authorities. And so what we've seen is kind of, fractured solutions where somebody might have a RIM system, but it doesn't talk to the artwork management system. Someone might have an artwork management system and it doesn't talk to labeling. And then you have maybe LIMS at the very beginning and at the very end for managing your clinical data, and then also for any laboratory testing things that you might be doing on site at the manufacturing facility. And so it's kind of an ad hoc approach where all these tools have been put in place and they don't really speak to each other. A lot of them too are proprietary systems that may have been developed internally. The majority that we see of people managing this information is still either on SharePoint or in network folders. So we see that quite frequently.
Yeah, and Peter, I'll add to that. We see a lot of those similarities, right? Even organizations having specific individuals managing information on their desktop, and really what there's been, not necessarily a call from industry, but a real best practice is finding that an evolution of harmonious systems we see here is kind of one of those last bullets. As we see health authorities starting to adopt more structured formats in which industry needs to communicate their data back to them, it creates that need to really ensure that information's being seamlessly communicated, it's accessible by many organizations or many within the organization. So that need for a centralized point to store and consolidate that data becomes critical, ensuring that the multiple members within, whether it be the regulatory kind of umbrella or those ancillary aspects that kind of feed back into that health authority communication, have access to that information, or more importantly, a method to communicate the information from that centralized point to then whether it be a vendor system or another system that's being adopted internally. And so some of those best practices when approaching that is really having a cross-functional group to mind map and understand where's the data used, where may it be used downstream. So when we look at our friends in industry that have been at this for decades, right? Companies have been established for some of them centuries, right? Or over a century. That data, it's huge data, huge amounts of information. And we even see, from a clinical trials perspective, they could have studies that span years, and as well as many studies happening at the same time. But then those organizations that may have a new innovative drug, they're kind of at a point where, hey, you can really take a moment to look at this from a holistic level, that 500-foot view, and say, where are we and where's this information coming from? A lot of the impetus then for the more established organizations are things like IDMP, some of the shifts to different ISO standards, different industry standards to provide a more harmonious set of data sets. And you're really providing that type of gap analysis on what you're trying to achieve is one of those really, the risk really outweighs the reward outweighs the risk in that scenario of taking that moment to step back and look at it as an organization as a whole.
Okay. And David, are there any kind of common things you see between your clients that are keys or successful, kind of the keys to success for this, for information storage?
Yeah, we'll see it pretty frequently where there may be scenarios where an organization's looking to update a change to their content of labeling, we'll say, or they have an upcoming approval and they've gotten communication from the health authority, and it's time to now make that regulatory submission. And the tracking of the changes, it tends to be one of the more difficult aspects of that process. Ensuring that version to version of what we're creating is being maintained, and that you have a really good sense of what was in the previous submission we had, right? Or what was in that drug listed label we sent to the agency, but then what are in all the various changes we've made since then for our different scenarios we have working.
Yeah, okay, excellent.
Yeah, so to give an example of this, I'll go ahead and share my screen momentarily.
Okay, hang on a second, I got to make you the presenter there, David. Mm-hmm. There you go.
This is Navigator for Drug Labels. It's a label research tool we've created here at ReadTech. In just doing a simple search like COVID, right? A name search. You'll see there's some additional information in here that the results of the system. But really, what we're looking to focus in on are the specific examples of the EUA vaccines, right? So we'll see here we have the Moderna and Pfizer versions. So if I go into the first product that was approved with the emergency use authorization, we have many different versions that have been created over time. In fact, before the the product was approved by EUA. It's a pretty basic label we're reviewing here. If we go into after that emergency use authorization, you'll see that the product then expands. The product label listing expands. There's a lot more content in here, which is to be expected. Right now, it's being commercially distributed for the pandemic purposes. And then going back to our search results, then kind of taking a look from a almost a strategy perspective, looking at how Moderna has managed that process. We see there's only just a handful, right? Just 2 updates we've seen. This was that kind of same idea, that very basic label before the EUA approval. And now when we get into January 13th, 2021 version that hit Daily Med, a much more comprehensive review. So different strategies from different organizations. That's the point. Not every organization's managing this type of information the same way. Some may update information more frequently. Some may keep it relatively static until they have to make a change come the mid-year update. So Peter, I'll kick it back over to you here to kind of show from a content perspective that how an organization's viewing those changes.
Okay. So I believe you need to make me presenter again.
Yes. All right, and it's kicked on back over to you, Peter.
So as we saw using the same example, there were some changes that were submitted. We want to be able to track, and that's what TVT helps you do, is track and find those changes between your 2 different documents, 2 different submissions. So we can see that that there's been some changes. We can go through and take a look at all those changes. Interestingly, this is one that's in the news right now. Is it 5 or 6 doses per vial? So you can see how just this little piece of information, change from 5 to 6 doses per vial, has an impact. Going back to that slide that we showed, where you have all that information coming in from different areas and going out to different areas. This is where we get into the change management end of things. Is how do you capture those changes? How do you first, define how you're going to change things, which is what David showed, how you're going to capture those changes, how you're going to find those changes, and what you're going to do with them after. So, the process is actually quite complex, and many users touch it. So it's good to have an overall understanding and a strategy for managing all those changes and how you're going to work with them internally, collaborate on it. David?
Yeah, and that was a great example, Peter. I mean, just seeing from one minor change to the next, it really details out. And then it really shows someone what's happened, right? Why did we do this? Well, that's exactly why. FDA is asking for this, or this health authority is asking for that, and all right, that was implemented. Great. Now, from those information management needs, today's needs, they're constantly evolving, right? So whether it's compliance, quality, the globalization of organizations, right? So in Moderna's scenario, their EUA is their first product to market, if you will. It's not necessarily approved, but they're going to be globalizing probably quite quickly and moving into health authorities that 2 years ago they may not have necessarily foreseen that quick of an adoption globally. And then the harmonization of the data, but not just the information we're managing. I kind of look at the harmonization as the harmonization of our systems. In looking at RIM as more of it's very rare that we'll find an end-to-end solution that can do it all, right? So really finding that harmonized group of systems, either internally built by vendors, or even some of the systems that the agents or the FDA or different health authorities have make accessible and viewable to industry. So a lot of that, what we find is when really looking at this from a higher level, whether it be the compliance side, knowing what we need to be doing, what we need to be sending to these health authorities. And then from the quality perspective, making sure we're tracking a lot of this, ensuring that the quality of our products, the quality of our submissions and so forth, being able to have things more buttoned up can really help. And so, Peter, we were talking kind of in preparation for a lot of this. Read Tech, we see a lot of the the downstream information, right? What we provide is a very targeted solution, and it's a critical solution. TVT tends to be implemented across an organization more broadly. From your experience, what has been some of those best practices that really help organizations from kind of top to bottom here?
Mm-hmm. So I'll use artwork management as an example here. Not only so once you can get a handle on your internal processes and things like this, then you can also use that to leverage, benefits externally as well. So for example, we have one client that does their comparisons. They take the TVT reports and they put it into a database system, actually SAP to be exact. And then what they do is they're running metrics inside of SAP. So they can see that, supplier A returned 6% deviations in 10 days, whereas supplier B returned 10% deviations in 20 days. So then it becomes easier to kind of manage your overall processes in business by having that information centrally stored and reported on, and all those changes tracked, globally through multiple systems. So we see a lot of interesting applications like that from clients.
Yeah, and that the slide you presented earlier that kind of showed that labeling management, and it gets back to there's so many different ancillary pieces, whether it's managing the artwork, the core artwork, and then how it varies from health authority or even region to region. Same thing with labeling. And here in the States, it's a little easier, right? Reg Affairs has it a little easier where there's one common language. But as an organization globalizes and starts having products approved in different areas, or approaches the EU trying to get product approved there, that's when we start getting into multiple languages within multiple regions, and it just the complexity of that information expands, and then you're moving into, okay, now we need an accurate translation service that you may not have even thought of when we were looking at the how that might differ, or even French Canadian versus French in France, and the nuances to the languages there. Luckily, we don't have to do like Northeastern English versus Southern English, but
yeah, it's true. It's true. So then we get into change management. Some of the things you can look at here is to actually have a checklist and look at who's approving, who's changed. Do we capture everything? Tie that into your regulatory activities. Something that Reed actually says quite a bit is to have a single source of truth and agree who's owning it, but also who's got inputs to it. Again, from that first set of slides we saw, you get different pieces of information from different groups, and so you have different owners in a system. And as David pointed out, you have larger companies that have are still very siloed. We have Department A that really doesn't speak or interact with Department B. So breaking down those silos and getting people to communicate together, not only the systems communicating but the people communicating, we find it is a key to success. Makes things flow very, very much more easily. Smaller companies, you're kind of starting from the beginning, so you can take some of these things into account as you build and grow. So perhaps it's a little bit easier for smaller pharma companies than some of the legacy pharma companies. And then when you look at specific examples, just a simple change with Brexit, where the address of the marketing authorization holder changed or had to change, right? It had to move to mainland Europe. So just changing the address on all of your materials becomes quite a large change to manage, especially if you have multiple products, multiple dosages, etc.
Yeah, and even to expand on the changes within health authorities and regulatory responsibility. Brexit to UK is a perfect example, but right now what we're seeing with the implementation of unique device identification and globally, in that global concept of UDI, not every region's the same, right? Much like with the electronic drug registration and listing services at FDA, Health Canada is adopting something similar, But the EMA just recently announced, or they put some more final formal guidance together, but they've been targeting another health level 7 standard. So these standards of that final kind of output you're submitting then to agents, these health authorities, for these critical registrations could differ region to region, health authority to health authority. And having those harmonious systems to do so is critical. But then once something changes from one to the other, how are we managing that? And Peter, we were talking a bit about that the best practice. I think a small pharma scenario, it's very similar to, okay, yeah, we have approval now. We're going to start, the machine running. We're going to start getting new systems implemented. It's similar to when large pharma companies either merge or there's an acquisition, where now we have to take that step back to ensure, okay, how are we bringing these organizations together? One of the things we were talking about is, what do you see as that the best practice, the cleanest data then coming into that change management? Could you help kind of touch upon on that?
Yeah, so I think it's again, from the first graphic, when we've got it centralized and we know we've done that mapping and we know what pieces of information are used where, then it becomes much easier for us to track down, which assets and which labels and which cartons, inserts need to be changed, which marketing ad promo materials need to be changed. So if you have that kind of central spider web understood and defined of where your information is used, then the ability to effectively manage those changes and push those changes across the organization and ensure that they're being changed correctly becomes much easier.
Yeah, so almost like a fine mix of systems and processes.
Correct. Yeah, I don't think you can have one without the other. And the technology is an enabler and it helps you do that. But at the core, it's defining your business processes correctly and understanding where the information is used. And then kind of going back to future proofing. If you have that in place, it makes it much easier for you to respond to changes, either market changes or health authority changes, new regulations that are coming out. That you can more easily respond to that because you've already got your internal procedures and systems buttoned down.
Yeah. Great. Yeah. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Peter.
No, go ahead, David.
Yeah. So really, when thinking of optimizing the process, it starts with who are the stakeholders and what are our technologies, right? Or what are those technologies we're looking to expand towards? Ensuring change management, ensuring that there's a way that we're managing this specific content, strategic content we're reviewing, and then implementing the management of all of that, and ultimately taking it back to the components we've mentioned, ensuring that the various stakeholders that are being affected by this have a seat at the table to ensure that this is a happy and harmonious wheel, with then happy and harmonious technologies to create what we like to call a happy regulatory family.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting, we would mostly, view those stakeholders as internal, but you can also look at your supply chains, like we were talking about before. I mean, agreeing with your supply chains on standards for things. So, this is the corporate font I'm going to use. This is the type of document and the formatting of the PDF, like it should be live text. We want to have it tagged correctly. So if we post it online and people that are visually impaired can read it. So there's, the change in the content and the implementation management, but think of it also externally to your supply chains, where you have information going in and out, artwork agencies, translation companies, consulting firms, etc. Think of those two as part of the process.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we're coming to the end here. We've got about 3.5 minutes left. So there's many business benefits. We just kind of selected a few here to focus on. So obviously, if you're managing and tracking everything and doing that properly in terms of change management, you've obviously got faster time to market. And we know that's a key for originators. You know, you've only got a certain amount of time on patent protection where you can take advantage of that. And even generics, where you may not have patent protection, but the faster you can get new versions, flavors, dosage sizes, number of caplets into the market, the better it is. You're responding to market needs faster, therefore you'll be more profitable.
Yeah, and from the improved quality perspective, I mean, even from the lens we wear here at ReedTech, when we see the organizations that have very quality, the processes are in place, ensuring change management's in place, we see less back and forth, more accurate submissions. And that's the goal with all of this, is really implementing a process in harmonious systems to ensure we're improving quality, improving better outcomes, and then improving a better patient experience based on the products and that we're delivering.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, management theory 101, you can't improve anything unless you're measuring it. So if you have measurement and you're tracking metrics across all of your key systems and key processes, then you can identify ways to improve that improve the performance, not importance, but performance there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we see a microcosm of this in what we do, right? How to help our clients get to where they need to be faster without having to request that we process things within 24 hours, right? Really providing a snapshot of what we've provided them over time and helping them review, okay, here are the metrics we see. Now, here's where we believe it can be improved.
Good point.
Yeah, and a lot of this ultimately leads to happier employees, right, Peter? Yeah, I think personally, because ReedTech, we utilize TVT in our data preparation process, and if I put my lens on of our operations team, if I had to read through every single label and try to point out any discrepancies, I wouldn't be too happy, right?
Yeah, and we internally say, you know, we allow, you know, our users to sleep better at night. They don't have to worry that, you know, did they catch all the differences? Did they catch all the deviations? Were the changes made that were supposed to be made? You don't have to worry about that, because that's a real high risk scenario, and you know, so we like to say that we help our users sleep better at night. And so finally, in closing, you know, we did a very high level and quick overview of, you know, various topics. We had the idea that this potentially could spawn discussions or another webinar on different topics. So Kate, if you could launch the poll, we'd like to see if the audience is interested in, you know, seeing another webinar, perhaps on another topic here. You know, both Reed and Schlafender Hase, we work with a lot of different providers in the industry and other vendors that serve pharma and medical device. And, you know, we could always bring in guest speakers to help us, you know, and experts on these areas to help us provide some more education and information for you.
Peter, as far as the poll results go, about 29% of attendees would like interested in another webinar on artwork management systems, labeling management systems. Okay. 57% interested in data management for submissions to health authorities. Okay. 7% interested in change management, and another 7% have entered other responses in the chat. So yeah.
Okay, excellent. You know, on behalf of Schlafender Hase, I'd like to thank our friends and teammates, industry teammates at ReedTech. Always a pleasure, David.
And likewise, Peter. It's always great collaborating with the Schlafender Hase and industry leaders.
Hello, thank you all for joining the webinar today, and hopefully you found all that information valuable. So now we're going to jump into the live Q&A section. I am Erin McDermott from ReedTech, and I have on the line with me as well David Wilson from ReedTech and Peter Muller from Schlafender Hase, who you just saw give the presentation. As a reminder, we do still have the questions box open within the GoToWebinar application. So if you do have any questions based on the presentation or otherwise for Peter and David, you could certainly type those in there and we will address them. So guys, to get started today, the first question that we got was, how do you keep up to date on changing regulations?
Good question. David, do you want to go first, or you want me to?
You know, I'll start briefly, right? So internally
Sure.
here at ReadTech, what we're typically doing is reviewing and analyzing what the different health authorities are putting out, right? As we prefaced in the recording, there are two divisions and pillars here at ReadTech: our medical device side, our pharma side. We are providing a pretty specific but critical service, and today there's a lot happening, right? So a lot of what we're doing is monitoring that news, kind of monitoring different industry kind of publications to see what they might be providing. RAPS, Regulatory Affairs Professional Society, is a really good resource. Other organizations like whether it's X-Talks or Green Light Guru provide a lot of great details and information. And it's not just necessarily pharma or med device related, right? So we're typically kind of looking at both ends. There's a lot happening on the medical device and global unique device identification front, constant changes, whether it's the new implementation of things or new requirements coming out, and then just as recently as like when we were speaking earlier this week, how EMA's put out some new press releases regarding IDMP. So a lot of those things, it's keeping an eye on things, but also having some tips from our friends when things are coming through, right, Peter?
Yeah, I was going to suggest that. What we do is we follow a lot of different vendors on social media. So, I mean, Reed's putting out information and updates on various topics. So social media is very good. We do that ourselves as well for our customer base. But there are other vendors, like you said, Green Light Guru, that provide updates on social media. Primarily LinkedIn, I would say, is the best source. And as you mentioned, RAPS. One other thing that I could add that I've started following very recently is attending the FDA webinars. The FDA does provide some good education and good updates on upcoming programs. I've yet to find a good source for the EMA like the FDA webinars, but I would suggest those are some good sources. But social media is good because it gives you those quick digestible summaries of usually very long, complex regulatory texts. So I highly recommend those.
Yeah, and when you mentioned the FDA, are they the SBIA events?
Yeah, the CEDAR puts them on. The SBIA events, yeah, for sure. So the different divisions within FDA have those webinars for industry. Yeah.
Great, yeah, they're definitely great resources. Being able to attend those in person was always a really great opportunity as well. So hopefully soon enough, things will open up again. And the other one I was thinking is DIA, Drug Information Association, typically provides a lot of really good information. We'll be attending their global labeling event coming up in a month or two, and it's usually a really good or great gathering of kind of thought leaders. And so whether it's these smaller or blog posts and so forth are really good, but these industry events where if you can either attend in person or even virtually, they're also great resources for a lot of this information.
Yeah, good point.
Absolutely. And I will confirm DIA Global Labeling is April 4th to 6th. So just about. So our next question is, do you foresee harmony between regulations in the future?
Okay. Yeah, good. I guess taking a point from David's slide, harmonious integration between different things. Yeah, you do see various regulatory bodies around the world that are trying to harmonize their approach and, come up with, the holy grail for everybody in pharma and med device would be to, have one submission format that's accepted by every regulator around the world, right? We do see that developing. The regulators do speak to each other and try and harmonize things. We've seen some examples, and maybe David, I think you're closer to that, so you can maybe give us some examples of that. But you do have various organizations that are also external pushing for integration. So RAPS is one that you mentioned. There's an organization that specializes in pharma, or is made up of the pharma industry, called IRIS, so IRISS -forum.org. They're a good advocate for regulatory harmonization around the world. And then on the kind of artwork side, you've got the Ghent work group, so gwg.org, that actually works with ISO to develop standards for packaging and labeling around the world. They're also kind of key in harmonizing standards and working to that. David?
Yeah, I think those are great suggestions, right? Those organizations do a great job, and they're also driven by thought leaders that are constantly keeping industry updated. So those are great. When I look at kind of the we typically looked read tech, traditionally over time, it was like we're that last mile of getting your data that's required to the health authorities in the structured product labeling XML. And we touched upon it in the webinar earlier. Health Canada is very close to implementing structured product labeling for the content of labeling of the product monograph narrative. Very similar to what FDA has done, right? And a lot of the initiatives there is to harmonize with these different IDMP standards, controlled vocabularies. But then when you look at what EMA is doing with the future of the electronic prescribing information, it will be also utilizing a health level 7 standard, but a little different, right? So while these standards are similar, they are fundamentally different, right? So it's, you can't just go to your system, click a button, and it creates it when these new standards are in place. So having that, really, we touched upon it in the webinar. There's task force that are really keeping an eye and a pulse on what's happening, understanding what's different from XEV MPD to now moving towards that FHIR standard for the electronic prescribing information. How is it going to change? How is it going to differ? How will it impact us? And then preparing systems internally. So the IRIS groups has been great for leading a lot of that initiatives. In the press release, the EMA did note that there will be additional kind of pilot programs and working groups for the electronic prescribing information. So it gives industry that opportunity to be involved early. So before these requirements are, whether it's final, right? Not necessarily set in stone, but maybe in like Play-Doh, we know what it is, and we can start planning ahead. So yeah, I think that's absolutely both of these topics, right? In questions, which are great. How are we keeping up? How do organizations keep up with the health authority standards? And then, how might they be implemented over time? And how can we ensure that our systems are harmonious? I think, Peter, you hit on it in the webinar very eloquent, really, right? It doesn't matter what systems you may have, but if your processes are garbage, none of it will really work, right? So it's, having that core foundation of good processes and good documentation can then lead to allowing the newer technologies that you may be implementing to really thrive and make it that much easier on your teams.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, David. We could also say rely on your vendors a bit. because, you know, I know both ourselves and Reed, we were involved in the Health Canada pilot project, and we did some testing early in the process to see that, okay, there's, you know, generally it's similar, but there are a few tweaks that we each needed to make to our systems. And also, you know, okay, we're going from English only to now we've got a French template and an English template. So,
Yeah.
you know, potentially doubling the complexity. So yeah, that's a good point, is you know, rely on your vendors to provide some of this knowledge and education and keep up with some of the changes that are coming. So answering both questions, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that it is a concept where when you're looking at foreign language translation and in foreign languages, like with English, you know, they don't have accents, they don't have tildes, there's no umlaut from what I've seen in a standard English word, but there are, and I am a fluent Spanish speaker, and you know, growing up, you know, that was always something that I had taken for granted, knowing exactly where the accent should go just because of, you know, growing up speaking Spanish. But those are my friends that were in classes together. It's not always there, and you know, those are the types of things when you're reading through, if you're proofreading a document and you just miss exactly where that accent was. I mean, those are the types of things that these automated tools like TVT can really just help someone shine, right? Like you said, you know, ensuring people can sleep at night, right? Making sure what was sent to the health authorities is going to be accurate, and that we didn't miss an accent or or have the accent on the wrong vowel. So, you know, those are the types of application of vendors, tools like you had mentioned, that sometimes you don't even need full-blown SOPs because the vendor's handling that aspect of it. Now, knowing what that vendor does, you know, being able to have some of those SOPs that the vendor might be able to provide you to implement in your process are very helpful. But yeah, that's a great point.
Yep. Yeah, and you can think, you know, we kind of take a Western view of this, but imagine, you know, getting into Thai where you've got double accents, intonation marks, you know, Arabic and Hebrew where you're reading right to left, and there's different scripts that represent different characters, so it gets very, very complex. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were actually we were working through an interesting concept that would have been translating, you know, not necessarily language-wise, but translating data from Word formats to XML in many different languages. And you know, the complexity to the languages definitely adds to the complexity of the conversions, but also, like you said, the QCing of that information. And so when it comes to SPL XML in the US's implementation of it, while it is one language, we do work with clients who ask us to then create a Spanish version of the XML. So that way it's that much easier for them to publish information to the public coming from the XML source, opposed to using various Word documents or PDFs that might be used and reused downstream from regulatory. So instead of saying, okay, regulatory blesses this Word document, and then marketing, manufacturing takes it and starts making their markup in extrapolating the text where they need, utilizing the XML to drive those new documents is a concept a lot of our clients are utilizing. And so when we look at what's happening in Health Canada with the two languages, we're familiar with it, right? We've managed XML in different languages. We're not necessarily reviewing the content for accuracy. We rely on our clients for that. And what we're finding is many of the organizations we work with, that translation piece is typically outsourced as well. So, you know, we'll say it again, right? That harmonious ecosystems of regulatory vendors that can fit within your regulatory team will ultimately help with not just ensuring your compliance today, but ensuring as things are modernized, it streamlines that process.
Yeah, it's true. That's the single source of truth that you were talking about during the webinar. You know, driving all that different content, whether it be your labeling, your marketing ad promo, your, you know, revised submissions, updates, you know, all that content being centralized and knowing where it's used and reused allows you to control that information, and not only, you know, for your benefit, but also to avoid problems such as off-label marketing, publishing erroneous information, etc.
Yeah. Yeah, and even if it's just not necessarily a health authority change, right? We mentioned it in the webinar, an M&A activity, right? An organization acquires a portfolio or a product, and it doesn't necessarily just affect human prescription industry as well, right? These types of scenarios can be compounded when volume is an issue, right? So if a consumer company acquires a consumer division from another organization, and now they have to make wholesale changes to hundreds of labels for over-the-counter drug products, that's a time-consuming process that, when using Word documents, PDF, and share folders, can be quite time-consuming. So, you know, the artwork vendors, label management vendors out there that really help with, you know, keeping control of that data. While previously you may have thought, oh, that's expensive, you know, we'll keep it as is. Once you get a project like this on your hands, it's like, man, that would have been money well spent.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, thank you guys. And it looks like we are getting just about to time, but I will sneak in one more question. And then if you guys have any final thoughts, of course. So the question is, once you have, I guess, the files created, can you make one change and implement it across the different global health authorities?
Okay, so yeah, and actually this was a concept that a colleague of mine, Gary Stainer, and I were involved in a DIA RSIDM forum session where it was talking about a concept of structured content authoring and utilizing XML at its core to build your files and build the content that then ultimately may end up in a specific health authority's file format. So yeah, there are concepts out there that are even implemented today with artwork tools as well, right, Peter, where you could substitute from the core data the element that's needed and then spread it out across all of the various regions. But when it is this global perspective, right, of many different global regions, a lot of times it's not just, oh, we did it and then it's fail proof, right? There's definitely that aspect of the process where we need to ensure that quality review, that the information is going into the right place. And maybe it's a matter of then tweaking the system to ensure that when we make these changes, it's implemented in the right place. If there's any type of automation or artificial intelligence involved in it, helping the artificial intelligence learn better where the things should be going. So it's always a constant process of ensuring that the process is working, doing the quality review, and Peter hit it on the head with the metrics, right? Being able to have metrics that we can then look back at to ensure how are we qualifying that this is correct, right? But yeah, Peter, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I was going to say that it kind of goes back to I think the first or the second slide where we talked about mapping, you know, using a mind map to understand where all your information is used and you know, ensure that it's you know, used correctly by checking the content through each step and each change. So yeah, I would just mention that you know, as kind of that first step to getting to that process is understand where your data is used, where your data is stored, and map it out. So map all those connections.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you guys. So we are over time, so I will just wrap it up for today. So Peter and David, thank you so much for your participation. All the attendees, thank you for attending and for engaging with our webinar today. We greatly appreciate it. We do have another webinar planned in the next couple months that David and Peter will be speaking on once again. So stay tuned. You'll definitely be receiving some communication from us. And we hope to see you at the next webinar as well. Everyone have a great day.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.